Welcome to Teachers Talk Money, where a millennial high school teacher and a Gen X elementary teacher get together to talk all things money.
From salary scales to saving, investing, and self-care, we're here to help teachers master their money. I'm Christy.
And I'm Rachel, and we're so glad you're here.
Hey listeners, welcome back to another episode of Teachers Talk Money, and welcome to a new school year. Most likely all of you listening are right in the middle of that beginning of the year, high energy, fast-paced excitement. So we are with you. We are as well. Thank you so much for being with us. And in all of that excitement, we'd love it if you'd share your excitement about this podcast with a friend. If you'd subscribe and leave a review, we'd really appreciate it. So Rachel, hi, how are you? Any updates?
Hey, Christy. I am good, and I don't have any super intense, important updates, but I did just want to share it was time for me to buy some new underwear, replace some of my old. And so I went on a search to find affordable, sustainable companies that I could buy some underwear from, because obviously that's not something that I thrift. So
No? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can, but I'm not going to.
No.
So I went on my search. I always use this website called goodonyou.eco, which kind of vets companies for you and rates like how sustainable they are and gives you price ranges and stuff. So I went there to vet companies, and I found an awesome company. It's called Boody, Boody. I'm obviously not sponsored or don't have I'm not an affiliate with them or anything like that, but I just wanted to recommend them. They're bamboo underwear actually, but they're super comfortable, super high quality. I love the way they fit, and it's kind of like a struggle for me to find underwear that I really feel comfortable in. So I highly recommend them if anybody is looking to replace their underwear anytime soon. But how are you, Christy?
I am doing well, and I love that recommendation, goodonyou.eco. I have never heard of that, but it sounds like it's right up my alley. And yeah, bamboo. It's amazing what we can do with bamboo. There are so many cool products made from it now, and it's so much more sustainable than other fibers. I'm doing really well. My update is I similarly in the intimate department had to get a breast ultrasound this year in addition to a mammogram, because some certain women are, it's like an additional screener that helps make sure everything's good to go. And I just got the bill for it, and I haven't met my deductible on my insurance. So I had to pay about $300 out of pocket for it. And while that was a hit, that was like, oh, okay, now I know. Two good news pieces is my health insurance is going to be covering them going forward, which is great. Unfortunately, it cannot be retroactive. And for this one I had to pay $300 for, I'm using my HSA. Well, by not using my HSA, I paid for it out of pocket. I saved the receipt, and years down the line, I'll be able to be reimbursed for that expense tax-free. So we're going to talk a lot more about HSAs in a future episode, but open enrollment is going to be coming up here for folks, and it's a great thing to start looking into if you have the option, because it can allow you to cover all of your medical expenses and invest and get all of that money out tax-free whenever you want. So I was bummed to have to pay $300, but at the same time, I was like, I'm healthy, thankful for health insurance, and thankful that down the line, that $300 is going to come in handy when I decide to take it out of my HSA tax-free.
Yeah, that is such a beautiful thing. I really wish I had access to an HSA. They're so awesome.
It really, it's such a neat feature for sure.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you hit on the point of just being grateful that, we've got health insurance and that you're healthy, because I was just doing a Facebook Live actually with another educational company. And one of the questions that I got asked was, how to budget for paying for healthcare. I think the educator they did before and after care. So they didn't get the traditional employment benefits. And man, it is just tough out there. It's just so expensive and so terrible, but you have to pay for it. It needs to be a priority because God forbid the worst happens.
Right.
So yeah, very fortunate that we are in a position where we have access to awesome healthcare vehicles.
Yeah. So to shift gears, what are we going to talk about in this episode?
We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics because I feel like this topic really opened up a world for me, and that is boundaries. And it's such a timely topic for the start of the school year when we're just sort of trying to get our footing underneath us, right? And really determine what our boundaries are going to be that year when it comes to the workplace. So let's get started by talking about why boundaries are so tough to set and maintain, specifically as educators. They're definitely tough to set and maintain in all kinds of relationships, but I do feel like teachers are in a pretty unique position when it comes to setting these boundaries. So Christy, what makes it so hard to set and maintain these boundaries?
Yeah, and I have no idea how this has been created over time, but I feel like there's an expectation that teachers should be going above and beyond all the time. Mm-hmm. That we are expected to sort of be martyrs, and in our positions, if we are not like working overtime, that we're not working enough. And that if we're just working our contract days, that somehow we're not doing enough. And because of that expectation and sort of that culture, our boundaries are not always respected by coworkers, administrators, students, and parents. And that's something that we really have the opportunity as teachers to intercept and redirect. And it's been a really neat evolution over my career. And I'm excited to talk about how to do that in this episode. We've got some really great experiences and examples and tools to kind of throw out there that could help people. And, like I mentioned, work outside your duty hours is considered normal in many school buildings. And again, just kind of by the profession as a whole, coming in early, working or being with your kids during lunch, staying late, responding to emails at all hours. Those are all things that I know I have done in the past and still do to some degree. And, they're often considered normal.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about sort of what we do and how we kind of set our specific boundaries with those things. But I definitely do most/all of those things at different times too. Mm-hmm. And I think another reason it's so tough to set and maintain boundaries as educators is that a lot of the time, planning and grading takes more time than we actually have in a school day. I think that this is probably true for all educators, but speaking specifically as an English teacher, it is just not possible. I did a little bit of basic math to sort of illustrate this. But for example, if I have 5 classes of 25 students, aka 125 students, and they all turn in essays, and I spend an average of 10 minutes, just 10 minutes on each essay to read it through, grade it, and give it written feedback, it would take over 20 hours just to complete that one submission of essays, just to grade and give feedback on all of those. Dang. And even if I only spent 5 minutes on each essay, it would take over 10 hours. And that is already more planning time than I have built into an entire week of my work week. And my planning periods are usually being taken up, right, for meetings or to work with students. So that is just looking at grading alone from an English teacher perspective. There's just no level of it where you're going to not take just a ridiculous amount of time and still feel good about the level of feedback that you're giving your students. And so it is this really difficult tension between trying to take care of yourself and make sure you can get it done mostly in your duty day and still feeling like you're being a good educator and you're not leaving with all of that teacher guilt of not doing enough that we literally have about everything, right? And again, this isn't even including planning for lessons, which to me, actually, I feel like takes even more time because that's such more of a process in terms of just like brainstorming, coming up with the ideas and all of that stuff. So that is just like a little peek into what it's like to be an educator, in this case, specifically an educator who has essay submissions. So like English, maybe social studies. But yeah, it's just, it's not possible. And I think that that's pretty known by educators. I don't know that people outside of the profession really realize exactly what we're asking teachers to do.
Yeah. And at the elementary level, we never teach the same lesson twice in a year. So we're constantly assessing, adjusting, and I counted, and I'm designing up to 8 unique lessons a day, not counting one-on-one meetings with kiddos. And I have 2 hours of prep time a day between 8 and 4. So it's the same situation in that, because we have literally more work that can fit into a school day, it's so important for us to be really intentional about our boundaries and what we're spending our time on and how we're designing those lessons so that we're taking care of ourselves too. And we're not overworked and overwhelmed, because that has a ton of really potentially negative consequences that, again, if we can weed those out, let's do it.
Yeah. And with the planning, that isn't just like straight up time that it's taken, but that is so much creative energy to plan that many lessons. I cannot imagine. It is unfathomable to me how elementary school teachers do it, right? Like, which I'm sure when you heard my essay spiel, that seemed unfathomable to you. But just the challenges at every level are just so much more. Like, even if you aren't just talking about time, like that's a lot of thinking and creative energy going into that we just don't always have after full days of teaching.
Yeah.
So now let's talk specifically about setting boundaries on our time. And I guess we need to sort of establish why we're talking about time boundaries on a podcast that is mostly about money. So in any career, you're essentially trading your time and energy for money. That is really what it comes down to. And as teachers, it's common to not think of it that way because we're so passionate about what we do. A lot of times that paycheck actually can feel like an afterthought. I know that is definitely how I sort of think about it sometimes. But the relationship between time and money is very real, whether we're recognizing that or not. And it's important that we all start to really realize that. The education system, like we said before, it runs on a lot of unpaid labor because it isn't really that possible for many teachers to get everything done within their duty day. So part of fixing that, of course, is advocating for higher pay, right? Because we do need to be compensated for all of this extra work we're doing. But the other side of the coin is that we need to find ways to reduce the number of hours we work outside of our duty days, even if totally eliminating that work isn't realistic. So yes, I want teachers to be compensated more, but also I also don't want us working this much, even if we were being compensated for it, because it's not really sustainable any way you slice it. Both of those things, I think, are true at the same time. And we need to figure out what we can do right now to kind of make that better in our own lives while we're also working on fixing this broken system.
Rachel, you're just such a truth bomb dropper.
Thank
I just
you.
love listening to you sometimes. I'm like, dang, she says things so well. Yes, I agree. Yeah. And so by a rough estimate, teachers are putting in well over 2,000 hours a year, depending, on their situation. That fluctuates a little bit. But according to the Pew Research Center, the average American only works about 1,800 hours a year. And then if you add in, like we've talked about with side hustles, all of the teachers that need to take on a second or third job, and the number of hours teachers work throughout the year is off the charts. So yes, a super relevant issue for us to be addressing because it has so many ripple effects in our lives.
Yeah, I love looking at that research because I think there's this misconception that like, oh, you have spring break and winter break and you have summers off. And I don't think people totally understand that we're working through most of those breaks or just like trying to decompress, which can take an entire summer sometimes, or at least a good month of it. So that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So let's talk about our time boundaries, the boundaries that you and I personally set for our time. For me, I go in early almost every day. And that's really helpful for me because I get a lot of work done much quicker in the morning. I'm more motivated to, like, I don't have to get over that hump of trying to find more energy. I can just sort of speed through tasks a lot. And I do work through lunch, whether that means closing my door and getting tasks done, or it might mean that my door is open to students and I might just be hanging out with them, not working, but I'm still really serving the school during my time off by having that room open for students. I do leave right away though. And my duty day only goes until 3. So that is very nice.
Yeah.
I leave early because I need to avoid traffic usually, or on time because I need to go get to practice if I'm coaching. So I'm able to get out of the building then, but I do sometimes complete tasks when I get home. And I almost always work a little bit on at least one of my weekend days on Saturday or Sunday. It doesn't mean a lot, like that might just be a couple hours of work, but usually like there's a task I have to get done over the weekend at least. And during seasons when I coach, all of this can be very overwhelming because I just do not have that much time in my day outside of my duty day to really take to work on things for school. And so the time that I get to take care of myself or work on Teachers Talk Money stuff, which is my passion, it can be very limited. So I set some boundaries, especially with getting out of the school right away.
Mm-hmm.
But again, any way you slice it, it can just be kind of overwhelming depending on the workload at that period of time. So what do you do for your time boundaries, Christy?
Yeah, similar to you, I tend to get into school about 7:30 in the morning, which is a half hour before I'm required to be there. And I work through my lunch. We have a 45-minute lunch on paper, but of course, by the time you finish leaving the kids and get your lunch and go to the bathroom, it ends up being about 30 minutes. And I have to prep for my afternoon lessons. So there's no one coming in and setting up my lessons for me, so I have to do all of that work during lunch. So it's just standard that I chew and work all the time.
Mm.
Also similar to you, I try and leave right at 4, sometimes 4:30, depending on the day of the week and what kind of meetings I have. So leaving early is my compensation for the fact I have to go in early and work my lunch. For the first, I would say 15 years of my career, I spent way more time than that. Like right now, I don't bring work home with me. I don't work on the weekends. Sometimes I'll put in extra hours in the summer getting ready for the school year. But for the first, I would say 15 years, to be fair, maybe 10 to 15. I mean, it was weekends, mornings, evenings, every waking moment. And it's just what I felt like I had to do in order to establish myself in my career and in knowing what I was doing and doing it well. Looking back on it though, I'm like, man, I really could have used a better understanding of boundaries and pouring my time into things that ended up not being worth the amount of time I was giving them. And now one of the things I also do that has been very helpful, I work with some of my very best friends on the planet. I absolutely love them. They know that I'm not going to sit around and chat at school. I'm just not. I'm not going to, just go off topic in meetings. I'm not going to, it's not a social time for me at school. They know that as soon as we're done, I'm going to be like, okay, guys, I'm clicking off. I got to go, do this and that. And we make time for each other out of school, because when I'm not at school, I feel like I can relax. I can be a better listener. I can enjoy my time with them. Whereas if I'm at school, my to-do list is just always right there in my mind, and it's harder for me to really be present. So when I'm at school, I'm laser focused on getting that job done and getting out of there, because I need exercise. I need to see my husband. I need to get a lot of sleep. And diminishing that social time at school has really helped. And I'm grateful for friends that understand me and know that I'm not going to be doing a lot of chit chatting at school, because I'm on a mission when I'm there.
Yeah. And I think we'll get a little bit more into that kind of boundary later too, but I certainly have a lot of thoughts on that myself. It's a really hard one to balance.
Mm-hmm.
And we also want to talk briefly about boundaries on our emotions as well. There's a lot of guilt that is sort of a side effect of being a teacher. There's a lot of feeling less than if you don't feel like you're doing the most awesome job every single day, that you show up with every single lesson and all the feedback you're giving. And it's easy to feel sad or frustrated that we're not able to do everything for our students. And I actually wanted to just point out that I noticed something about the language that both Christy and I used in the previous topics we were talking about. When we were talking about the boundaries on our time. We both talked about leaving on time as leaving early. I caught it when I said it. And I was like, did I just say that leaving at 3 when my duty day is over is early?
Yeah.
I actually used that word. And then you did the same thing. And I just think it is so weird. It's crazy that we're almost even using language that expresses feeling guilt over doing not extra in every single way we can, which is crazy because we both come in early and we both give our time to the school during lunch. So just wanted to point that out, because clearly it's embedded even in our minds as people who have really been trying to be intentional about setting these boundaries and being very clear about, working in our duty days as much as possible.
That's such a good point. If we also think about, okay, how setting boundaries and taking care of ourselves affects the rest of our lives, it absolutely will translate into our financial health. And so that's where, this intersection of time boundaries and money really the point can really be made that when you set boundaries, you're preserving time and energy, be it physical energy or emotional energy for yourself. And when you have that, it allows you to meet your basic needs, recharge, and be a better human, partner, sister, mother, all of the things that you are, as well as being a better educator. So when you're setting boundaries, it allows you to, if we're thinking about finances, do a lot of things that are pretty fundamental.
Yeah, and one of those things can be meal planning, right? Like, for example, if you're setting these boundaries, you have more time and energy to think about, through the week and intentionally how you're going to pack your lunches or plan for dinners. And this is going to end up saving you a ton of money and time and allow you to eat healthier. So that's just like one small example, but we have a few more.
Yeah, if you have, we're hoping you have a budget, and that takes, a baseline amount of time and effort and energy. And so if you're constantly running on fumes, you're not going to have the time to pay attention to your budget and do that baseline work, which gives you access to all of your financial goals.
Yep. And boundaries can also allow you that time and space to actually start exercising and moving your body, which is another way that you can become happier and healthier and likely save you money in the long term just by being preventative healthcare wise.
And then obviously spending time with your kids and family, which if you're planning intentionally and have your budget, that you're able to do that in a way that works for your family and enjoy that time with them.
Yeah. And we also wanted to talk about sleep because that's something that you and I are both incredibly passionate about. Your quality of sleep affects like every aspect of your life. You make better decisions when you're able to sleep. It will actually probably end up saving you money. We treat quality sleep like it's optional a lot. I notice a lot of teachers doing this, and I don't blame them because, like I said, it's kind of impossible to get everything done in the day sometimes. And sometimes the thing that sort of goes by the wayside is that quality sleep, right? Well, if I just stay up till 3 a.m. making these lessons, then they'll be amazing and perfect, and I'll just have to be tired the next day, right? But it's not optional. It affects every aspect of your life. It affects your mental health so much. It affects your physical health, your diet, and more. So it has to be a priority. I feel so strongly about that.
Yeah, and this is, I think, an excellent, at least for me, a really important intersection between my emotional health and my physical health and my financial health. About 8 years ago, I had this severe insomnia. And it was related to anxiety that I wasn't even really aware that I had. And I completely stopped sleeping. And money was the last thing on my mind. I was like, I don't care what I eat. I don't care. It was just like I couldn't even think about a budget because I was in such a terrible place. And that was all tied into my life, my work, my relationships. And I had to stop and pay attention to it. And money was just like so far in the back seat. So now that I have a way of sleeping and a way of managing that anxiety, it really has affected my finances because I have the space and the emotional energy to make the decisions that are best for me.
Totally. Thank you for sharing that. So let's get into some examples of where boundaries might need to take place. Let's get into some things that could creep into our lives, both inside and outside of our contract day as educators, that we might need boundaries with, and talk about how we can really draw the line in these areas.
Yeah, one of the most pressing things I hear from teachers that are not tenured yet is they feel more vulnerable and they feel like they have to sort of be the yes people and have a harder time setting boundaries because we know that like new teachers have a pressure on themselves to feel like they have to prove themselves to their administrators and be a contributing member of their team. And so I think we really need to just recognize that if you're a non-tenured teacher, those years are going to maybe feel like it's a little harder to set boundaries depending on your situation, but don't be afraid to lean on your teammates and ask for help because as a veteran teacher, I absolutely have been there and would be more than willing to help, non-tenured teachers build lessons and share resources and all of those things that could alleviate some of that pressure for them. So definitely being non-tenured could be a place that it just is trickier to set those boundaries.
And that's kind of scary too, because it's a lot more time consuming, I think, to be a teacher in those early years. So not only are you unable to set those boundaries when you're asked to do extra things, or because you maybe think you can put something else on your own plate, but you're also creating a lot more lessons than you'll be creating in later years, right? And figuring out how to find that balance with grading that you might not find until you are in your 4th or 5th year and you do have that tenure. So that's kind of a sticky situation.
Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of mentoring programs that are happening now. And I would say to non-tenured teachers, don't hesitate to reach out to the resources and supports that may be there structurally for you or just in relationships that you're building, because that could be a great way to preserve some of that time and emotional energy and feel like you're able to take care of yourself in the middle of, really a pretty high intensity time during your career. So another situation that can be really stressful for teachers is those parent communication boundaries. And sometimes you can get that phone call or that email and it can be really, really unexpected. And then it ends up hijacking you emotionally. So I've had times where I get an email on a Friday evening from a parent that is critical or that is challenging the decision I made. And it's so easy to then spend the whole weekend worrying oh, did I do the right thing? Or should I email this person back right now? And it's so important to just say this is normal. This is going to happen. Parents, of course, are going to be defending their children and not always on the same page as us. And this is where I have spent so many untold hours, worrying and trying to create those, because I think parent relationships are just fundamental in the success of our students. And I just feel like that's such a huge part of my job is building an allyship and a relationship with parents so that we're on the same page for their kiddo. And if I'm not really clear about when the thinking and worrying about that stops and starts, it can be a big issue.
And I really agree with you on that, Christy, because I feel like that is some of the hardest feedback and sometimes criticism to receive is from parents, because obviously they care so much about their child and their child's success. And when they don't see that you are caring that much, or you get an email that maybe is really angry or something like that, it's you already have all this stuff on your plate. You already have a bajillion essays to grade and you've got to get your plans for next week or tomorrow or whenever it is. And then you see this email come in and that just completely derails everything else. And suddenly the entire tone of your day has shifted and it makes it harder to do your other work as well. I wish we had better tips for this other than just constantly reminding yourself that, like you said, Christy, it's normal, it's expected, it's okay. And you just have to deal with it as best as possible and not let it seep into every other aspect of what you need to get done that day.
Yeah.
The next sort of place where it can be difficult to draw boundaries is when you're asked to do work like committee work or paid versus unpaid committee work. What are the boundaries when you are getting a stipend for something, and what are the boundaries when you're doing something completely volunteer based? Personally, I had to step down from an unpaid position and I pretty much had an identity crisis over it. It was a PLC leadership position. So essentially the 9th grade English teachers needed somebody just to make agendas for the meetings and be a voice for what administration wanted us to start implementing and stuff. And it just wasn't working. I didn't need that extra task in my day. I didn't want to be a mouthpiece for administration at a lot of times because I didn't agree with all the decisions being made, right? And I felt not very good at this position too. And I was this is really a problem for me because I've always seen myself as a natural leader. I've always seen myself as, a really organized person who would be great for a position like this. But I just was this isn't serving me. I'm not even getting paid for this. And it's just something else that I don't really feel that good about in my day. So I just want to stress to listeners, don't feel guilty for saying no to unpaid work. It's not something that you need to have this identity crisis over because you're not helping as much as you possibly can. You need to be able to take care of yourself first.
Well, it's so funny you say like not helping as much as you possibly can. And I wanted to add like for no pay at all, like
For
yet we
nothing.
still feel that obligation, right? And I'm actually just thinking about, there's always a like, well, we need people for this committee. Let me know if you're interested, or we need people to design this. Let us know if you're interested. And we usually have to make that decision on our team. And I'm similar to you. I'm like always signing up for things. I'm passionate about a lot of things. I tend to be the one that talks, at meetings. Not the only one, obviously, but like people know that like I'm okay getting out there, and now I really do have that little voice. I am a 43-year-old woman, almost 44. And I can say, hey, I don't think that's the best fit for me, or I feel I'm already doing A, B, and C. And part of me thinks, okay, well, that's me having to justify saying no. But at the same time, I do feel like I'm already pulling my weight as a team member. I can say I'm doing these 3 other things, and therefore maybe it's best if someone else steps up because I feel like I've already got a lot on my plate. So while I don't think we have to be able to justify it, we shouldn't have to justify saying no. At the same time, if we do feel like we're legitimately contributing a fair amount, it is okay to say no. And it's easier to say no because we can say, okay, well, this is what I'm contributing already. It'd be great, if someone else could pick that up. And then another thing that, that can creep in to beyond the boundaries or creep into the boundaries that we're needing to set is, of course, worrying about our students and problem solving difficult issues. That is one of the things where I'm like, I will figure this out. Like I will come up with something I can try with this kiddo tomorrow that will be an improvement. And I love the challenge of that in my job. I love the success that can come with that. But it is an area where I really have to be careful about when I'm thinking about that. Like 2 a.m. is not the time to problem solve this kiddo. Like I need to lean on my coworkers. I need to talk it through with them because talking through things really works for me. And so I use that time at school. And then I have to be really just say like, this is going to work out. If I look at all the situations that I've had like this in my career, they've all come to some sort of progress sooner or later. And while it is hard in the moment, I have to just say like, now's not the time for me to try and figure that out. I have to turn my brain off or do something that helps my brain turn off so that I can get sleep or be present with David or, enjoy my afternoon.
Exactly. And the thing about those difficult situations is that there is no perfect solution. So you can think about them forever and ever and ever, and way into the night when you should be sleeping or spending time with your family or being productive in another way or doing something else. I think reminding ourselves there's no perfect way to handle any of this. There's no right way. We can just figure out what we can do, the actions we can take, and then let the outcomes at that point be a little bit out of our control, right? There's only so much you can do. And I think that is really hard for a lot of teachers because we're like, what is the best way to address this possible? And it's like, there are so many complex issues that there is not a best way for us to address. I think just doing what you can and then just letting it be, because that is all it is ever going to come to.
Well, and showing up an exhausted teacher for that child is not going to help them. Like step 1 is being able to have energy to do my job. And if I'm spending all night thinking about it, then that's not going to be a win, So thinking about what I'm able to bring to the table and letting that help me set the boundaries is also really helpful.
Yeah. And then there are planning and grading boundaries, which obviously I'm still struggling with a bit as an early educator. I have kind of come to a place where I just grade a little bit every day in the morning. And I can plow through a lot of it then because, like I said, I'm a lot more productive in the morning when I first get to school. And that has helped me a lot because I find that when it piles up, it becomes a really big problem. And same with planning. If I can just front load some of that planning and then get to the place where I am a week ahead. So I'm essentially planning the same amount that I would be every day, even if I were doing it the night before. But I'm doing it the week before so that I have a little bit less of that anxiety because I was able to front load just part of it.
Yeah. And along those lines for me, I refuse to procrastinate. One of my core tenets is that procrastination actually takes way more time than just doing the task. And as soon as I feel myself dreading something, I am like, get it over here right now. I'm getting it done. If I see that pile of math tests that I have to assess and break out into standards and record, Even if it's Friday afternoon, I'm like, getting it done, because I don't want it hanging over my head, and I don't want to know that I've got to come in Monday and find time for that. So I will stay an extra, 15, 20, 30 minutes if it means I get it in the rearview mirror. So for me, the stress of having it looming over my head is worse than putting it off. And I just like rip the Band-Aid off. And I have to. It's not, it's still difficult either way, but I just feel like that's going to be the best use of my time, because if I'm spending time worrying about doing it, I'd rather just get it done.
Yeah, that's like the hardest thing, because I think we all intellectually know that and accept that like procrastination is not helpful or efficient, but we just do it anyway because the thing seems harder or scarier. But you're so right. The thing is not harder or scarier. It's actually harder and scarier to just ruminate constantly about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about social expectations, which you kind of hit on when you were talking about some of your personal boundaries at school. And these can relate to inside school or outside of school. And for me as a high school teacher, these certainly apply not just to my coworkers, but also to my students who want to like stop by and chat with me a lot. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, and this is tough because that community feeling at work and that work culture is so important. And actually, when I first started teaching, I told this story on the Budget Teacher podcast interview that I did, but I was literally barely making it through the days. And the person I had student taught with came to me and said, word's getting around that you're unfriendly. And if our principal hears that you're unfriendly, she will not rehire you, because I had to reapply for my job until I had tenure there. And there were 150 people that applied for it every year. So that was awful. And I was like, I have no time to be friendly. That's the last thing on my to-do list, is being cheery and friendly, because I am barely surviving here.
Yeah.
And so that was, a very different experience than what I have now, where, I'm very intentional about it. And I, like I said before, tell my friends, or they just kind of know that that's when they get to be with me socially, is outside of school, and at school it's mission focused. So sometimes avoiding, the staff room, or if places, where there's going to be a lot of conversations where you're going to get pulled into that maybe you need to be doing other things, just avoiding those spaces can be helpful. Closing your door, closing your blinds during your planning time can also be really helpful. And one of the things I always try to do when I'm going into another teacher's room is, instead of just leading with my question and what I need, I say, hey, do you have a sec? Just kind of respect that boundary for them and say, is now a good time for me to ask you this quick question, or should we meet later? By modeling that, I think we can hopefully build that culture of people asking me, do I have the time right now to chat with them? Or would it be better to do tomorrow, or, later on in that afternoon?
Yeah. And one thing that I don't think we put this in the outline at all, but it's sort of coming to mind now with the talk of avoiding the staff room or department room or wherever that is for you, is that sometimes that's a good emotional boundary too, because those can be really great social fun spaces, but they can also be spaces of a lot of negativity, because we deal with a lot of teachers and it's easy to get really negative sometimes. But certainly sometimes when I avoid some of those spaces, it is for the purpose of protecting my positive energy and not sort of letting those complaints seep into my day and kind of affect the way that I feel and see everything else that happens in that day, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about digital boundaries. I actually love talking about these because I guess they just feel a lot more actionable for me. Like it's a lot easier to set these boundaries and maintain them, maybe just because they apply only to me. Like I don't have to put these on other people as much. So my biggest tip, and this has been a really big game changer for me, is that I do not have email notifications come to my phone. So I have my email on my phone because sometimes I want to check it and it's helpful to have it there. But I do not have to be bombarded and interrupted with emails while I'm trying to get more important work done, or while I am trying to relax, like during my off hours. So it's really important for me to not have those things interrupt my train of thought or my headspace. So I can check it when I decide to. And I definitely think maybe I should set better boundaries with not checking it as often. But I have to say, like, teachers are afraid of doing this, I think, not having those notifications, but I have never missed an important email that I needed to respond to right away. And I can tell you that with 100% certainty. And then the other thing is I got control of my inbox after my first year teaching. This is a huge game changer. The email space can be an incredibly stressful space for educators because we just get, I mean, I don't know like if this is at every school or anything, but the amount of emails I get a day is ridiculous.
It's
like
so
ridiculous. Many. So what I do is I archive everything that I don't need and I don't need to respond to. I have different folders if there are emails that I need to refer back to, but I don't need to do anything with now. So I have like a coaching folder and what other folders do I have? I have a folder for journalism. I have a folder for fundraising things for journalism, right? All of these things, if I need to refer back to something, if there's a document in there that's important, I can put it there, but it doesn't have to be in my inbox taking up any space. So everything in my inbox represents something that I need to do or remember. So maybe it's an email I need to respond to, or maybe it's, you know, the weird schedule for Monday or whatever. So those are all in there. And I can say that right now I have exactly 5 emails in my inbox. 5. I don't have anything else. And this saves me endless time and it eases my anxiety. So this could be a huge task depending on how long you've let your email sort of be out of control. But it was a insane game changer for me. I have so much more space and I actually miss fewer emails. I think people are afraid of like, if they archive it, they'll forget something. Or if they put in a folder, they'll forget something. I don't miss emails like some of my coworkers do because I see every email that comes in and I make a decision about it like right then and there.
Yeah. So I have definitely heard a lot of teachers that don't have their email on their phone or don't have the notifications on their phone. And I have chosen to keep the emails on my phone and the notifications because I don't want any unexpected surprises when I get to work at 7:30 a.m. on Monday. So for example, that email I talked about that came in Friday at like 5:30, obviously that is like way past the time I want to be thinking at school, but I'm able to read it, go, okay, this is going to be waiting for me on Monday. And it like settles me to know like I have a time to read it once or twice and then not worry about it versus if I get to work on Monday, open up my email for the first time and go, oh man, here's this email that now I have to respond to and process and think about at 7:30 in the morning. And it just adjusts my time and emotional energy for the day. So in my situation, I'd rather know about it, make a plan, and then put it aside so I can, in this case, enjoy my weekend and not have any sort of unexpected surprises coming when I prepared to do something else. So I did not respond, in that case on 5:30 on Friday, and I responded on Monday, but it was nice for me just to go like, oh, I know this is there already. But I have to also be willing to say, I know I'm doing a good job with this kiddo. I know I can communicate with this parent in a really productive, positive way. And I didn't take it personally and let it wreck my weekend, so that's where those emotional, that work, I had to do that, over years to not let that email hijack my weekend.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of where like just different things are going to meet different people's needs. Because if I were to see that email at 5:30 on Friday, I'd be thinking about it all weekend, right? And I do check my email on the weekend sometimes. But again, like I make the choice to do that rather than having it sort of, like you said, just show up and hijack me. So I aim to be more like you, where I can just decide to put things aside, but it's difficult for me right now. So I'm glad to not have those notifications. And we got some listener tips. I asked my Instagram audience about boundaries, all kinds of boundaries that they set as teachers, but some of the most actionable ones and most of the suggestions I got were digital boundaries. I think, again, because they're so straightforward. One listener tip was that you can set an away message for when your duty day ends, just so that you don't have to worry about responding, because people will get an email saying, I will respond to this, during my duty day on Monday or whatever it is. And another listener tip we got was not having email on your phone at all. That kind of stresses me out, but it works for a lot of educators, so I'm not going to knock it. And then finally, a couple of educators said this. They have work laptops, like they get laptops through their county, I suppose. And they said, if you have a work laptop, work on leaving it at school on the nights, like just for nights, and maybe just taking it home on the weekend, or vice versa. Just take it home on the weekend, but leave it there on nights, right? So that can be a really good way to physically leave your work at work. And I'm sure you still have access to maybe things you need on your personal computer, but you're less likely to let that take over your nights or weekends, which I think is awesome. So in addition to those specifics, here are some big picture ways that can be helpful when we're thinking about boundaries.
So for me, the longer that I've taught, the easier it's become to set boundaries. And that comes from that experience, both with those communications with administrators and parents and other teachers, and because I have this huge bank of resources to pull from, so I don't have to recreate everything from scratch. So I think allowing yourself time and not feeling like you have to have this boundary thing dialed while you're still in the earlier years is okay, but it's something to just keep thinking about and working towards. One of the coolest ways I've ever heard of, I think a professor taught this at a university somewhere, to kind of envision boundaries, is he put a glass jar in front of his students and filled the jar with big rocks and said, "Is this jar full?" And the student said, "Yeah, it's full." And then he pulled out a jar of smaller rocks and added those smaller rocks into the jar with the big rocks. And of course, they filled up the little spaces. And he said, "Okay, is the jar full now?" And they said, "Yes." And then he pulled out some sand and poured that in. And of course, the jar wasn't full. Sand could fit in. And the lesson is that if you don't put those big rocks in first and you just fill up your jar with little rocks and sand, those big, important things in life are going to be much harder to fit in, or they're not going to fit in at all. So we have to think about what our big rocks are in our lives and make sure we put those in first, and then moderate the amount of those smaller little things that we allow in that jar as well.
I love that metaphor. And I also just wanted to make a side note that I think it's so funny because I'm the English teacher, but you always have the metaphors. Like, you are the queen of the metaphors.
I hadn't thought of that.
And I'm always like, dang, these metaphors are so good. But I just thought that was funny. Yeah, I love that. And then you also found another way of thinking about time management and a strategy to reduce stress. And that is something called the Eisenhower Matrix, which is like a way of categorizing things into, I think, 4 different categories to determine what those big rocks are. So that first category is everything that is urgent and important. So these are the must do in the next 24 hours, and they are extremely significant to your actual job, right? So that's like your big rocks, getting set for the next day of teaching, parent communications about something that happened that day, anything that should be on the forefront of your mind. So it has to be done in the next 24 hours, and it is extremely important of a task.
Yeah, and this is a really great thing to do a quick search on and Google it, because it's a visual, like a 2x2 array. And so that first box is urgent and important. And then there's things that are important but less urgent. So these are things that need to be on your calendar in a specific time domain, but don't have to be done immediately. They're not urgent, but they have significant value. So these are also big rocks, things like self-care, long-term planning, evaluation preparation and scheduling, committee work, all of those things in our job that are there and in our lives, frankly. I mean, I think when we look at this Eisenhower Matrix, we need to say, what are the things in and out of our jobs that need to be in this space, because they all need to get in that jar.
Totally. And then there is the urgent and less important category. So things that you maybe have a timeline for that you need to get done, but they're not really things that are fulfilling you or that are that important to doing your day-to-day work. So this could be that above and beyond committee work or extracurricular work. It could be administravia, as they put it. So paperwork or data collection. For me, this would be like completing my SLO. Do you do an SLO, Christy?
No, I don't know what that means.
Okay. It stands for Student Learning Objective. And it's essentially where we get a target group of students and we have a goal for them, and we need to collect data throughout the year to see whether or not what we're doing as a teacher is working for helping these students meet that particular goal. It sounds actually better. I think I made it sound better than it actually is in practice, because it just a lot of things about it don't make sense, at least the way that it is done where I work. So I don't feel that passionate about it, because I just think it's really not helping me to become a better teacher, even though that's what it's designed to do, right? That's that paperwork and data collection on my end. This could also be something like replying to unimportant emails. So something that you need to do, it's urgent in a way because you want to get back to people, and maybe you want to clear that email out of your inbox if you're me, but it's not that important of an email to respond to.
So those are like the small rocks, things that maybe you're not as passionate about, but they still need to get done. So they've got to be able to fit in the jar. And then the fourth category is less important and less urgent. And this is things like the sand, the things that maybe you could totally do without. And this is definitely where boundaries can come into play. So a great example would be overthinking something, right? And holding on to it and letting it, take over your time and energy when you could just say, I can let that go for now. Getting too fancy with a lesson or a design. And now I know I've definitely spent a ton of time on these things, but I was passionate about it and it felt like a big rock, so getting too fancy, if you're spending a ton of time on something and then stopping and asking yourself, does it really need to be this deep and big and over the top? Or can I simplify this to create more time for myself to do the things that I do need to spend time on?
Yeah, that's so awesome. This is a great way of thinking about it. So I think that's everything for our episode today. If you have any comments or questions or feedback or really great boundaries that have helped you a lot, please send us an email. Get in touch with us at teacherstalkmoney@gmail.com. And tune in next week. I'm going to be interviewing Miriam Saboka of Millennial Money on Instagram. She is an educator who is also super finance focused, and she creates a lot of awesome content around that on her Instagram, which is Millennial Money. I'll put it in the show notes. And we're going to be talking about paying off debt for the long term and how to stay motivated when your debt payoff journey is going to be more of a marathon than a sprint. And we're going to be talking about investing while paying off debt and trying to find a balanced approach for that, and what debt payoff methods are working for her and her sort of money values and mindset and background. I'm so excited for it. So make sure you tune in next time for that episode.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it. It's going to be great. We hope everybody has an awesome week and can't wait till next time.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us here on Teachers Talk Money.
Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss a future episode.
Leave us a review of this podcast. It helps more teachers find us.
Share it with a teacher friend who can use some of this information.
You can find more money advice from Christy at Financially Fit Teacher on Instagram and Rachel at Teachers Talk Money on Instagram and YouTube.
All opinions are our own, and our awesome theme music is by John Bartman.